their friends, they would be in the middle of their service and probably want to pick up their phone either. But, all right, so, did you write your cards?
Yes.
Okay, so my ushers, come on up, stand on up. If you've got a card, raise it high. Let's see if they got one. Yay! Let's get some cards. Collect them on up for me, and I'll see. It's always very fun. At least I have you write them down instead of making you do it. Thank you. Thank you. I kind of hear the music. Okay. Oh, I got another name. Okay, so now, don't talk amongst yourselves, but just give me a second here to organize. Oh, I should have brought my glasses. Well, you know, that's what happens when you get to be minded. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, good. Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Perfect. Yay, friends. Oh, better. There you go. Oh, so much better. Yeah, that's a good one. That goes with that. See, some of them have themes. Okay. I can do that one first quick. Okay. Oh, that's a good one. We can do that one too. Ooh, that's a really good one. Oh, fun! See, I do love this. Every time I get so nervous. Yeah. Welcome to the club on that one. Okay. Oh, this is really good. Someone asked, is there a list of military personnel that would like letters and cards for Valentine's? You know what, I don't have that, but I would love to do that. I would love for us to do Valentine cards. One of the things I was thinking of doing was, so you can come get them after, I'll leave them up here. One of the things we were thinking of doing was putting a little card together with a heart and some information about who we are and an affirmation, and then handing them out to the congregation for you to go give them to your friends, you know, as a little support to that. So if we could get that together this week, maybe we'll do that next week. But if somebody wanted to do this, if somebody had a connection to any group of military, we would love to send affirmations or send cards to people overseas or even here, anywhere, to give some support being where we are. So I can do that really quick. Okay. Somebody asked about a move update, and I think I could do that one pretty quick, and then we'll jump into the philosophy here. Yay, I think I could get through them. All right, gotta watch time. All right, so somebody wanted an update on our move. So if you're relatively new, you have not lived through the roller coaster of a joyful, amazing adventure we've been on here in the center over the last year. See, I'm being positive about it. That's good. So what has happened is we moved into this space 4 years ago, and we expected a little bit of an expansion and a growth, and then unfortunately it didn't happen. But the raise in rates of rent for each year continued to happen, and our expansion didn't happen. And so we got into a little bit of a crunch with the landlord because they put a number of ridiculous fees, I'm just going to say it, on top of us that put us into a little bit of a financial crunch last year that was very challenging. And by the grace of the divine and this generosity of this community, we have weathered the storm, and we're still here, which I'm grateful for. And so what has happened is, because of a couple of things that were coming together, we are making it, it has been made possible for us to stay in the space until the end of our lease, which is October 31st this year. So actually, starting in February, I'm putting out the call for anyone who wants to get onto our move committee to do some visioning and some legwork, boots on the ground out looking for our next space. We have a couple of ideas of directions that we're moving in, but we need some support in figuring all of that out. So that being said, we're here for now. And we are planning, I'm working on the calendar right now actually, for all of our events for the year as if we're going to be in the space till October 31st. Now, that being said, if someone wanted to come in and take over the lease and they let us out early, we're out, right? We're out. Because this is an expensive space for us, and although we love it and it's wonderful, we know that there's a right and perfect home, and we want to bring everything into perfect alignment, and the board really wants to be clear and responsible and good stewards of our finances. And so that would be a better choice if it came up, but at this point we don't have a plan to leave until October 31st, and we'll invite everyone to support us in joining us in prayer and knowing that we're going to find the right and perfect home that fits our budget, that fits our needs and supports us. And right now my intention is to set the roots down for this spiritual community for the legacy beyond each and every one of us, because I believe that this valley needs this light, this space of welcoming and affirming and support. And I want it to be here 25 years from now, when God, if I'm going to be here, I don't know if I'll be here in 25 years. But anyway, so I want the church to be here, whether I'm here or you're here or we're here or not. We want it to be a light unto the valley here. So that's our intention. Clear? Yep. Good? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, see, I did one. Ding. I should bring a bell. Okay. All right, so what am I going to start with? That one, that one. Where is it? Okay. There was a question that I just lost. How did I do it? I'm not sliding them. Oh, here it is. Okay. So, how do you explain what type of church we are? What's the denomination? And a way to explain it to Catholic friends and family members. Yeah, okay. Anyone else have that question? Yes, okay. So, this is who we are. We are a center for spiritual living. And that is we are part of a greater organization called the Centers for Spiritual Living. Now, we changed our name about 10 years ago. For the previous 80 years, we were the Church of Religious Science. And there were two aspects of that church that had split back in the 50s. There was the United Church of Religious Science, and there was Religious Science International. So they were like cousins. Actually, they were a brother and sister that were estranged, is what we were for years. And we came back together in 2010 or 11, and so this is how it works. The church is called called the Church of Religious Science. The philosophy is called the Science of Mind. And then we all screwed it all up and got everybody confused by calling ourselves the Centers for Spiritual Living. And the change happened because, for a couple of reasons. One is the Church of Religious Science never explained who we were. You don't get anything from that, right? There were a lot of complaints that people would align us with Scientology, and I'm not saying anything about that other than we are not Scientology. And so anyone who talked about, oh, I go to the Church of Religious Science, they would say, the first thing anyone would say would be like, but we're not Scientology. Right? Like that was always the first thing that you would say. I go to a Church of Religious Science, it's not Scientology, and so that was not an asterisk at the end of our name, but it was something that we had said over and over and over again, right? So spiritual living is what we believe in. We believe that God is in all of it. We believe that God is in every aspect of life, and it is in everything that exists. That divine presence, that idea that we have of God, not as a person, a judging Santa Claus God up on a cloud who's going to tell you when you're good and tell you when you're bad, and you hope you make him happy, right? That's not the belief of God that we hold. We hold the idea of God as a presence, the essence of life itself, that infinite wisdom that has brought forth the universe, that is as the perfection and the wisdom that is in the most minute particle and the most infinite part of the cosmos, and everything in between. And so what we do is our philosophy teaches us how to live spiritual lives, how to remember that in every aspect of our life, because we forget, right? We forget that we are connected to the infinite wisdom of God. We forget that we are connected to that creative force that brought forth the planets. We forget that we are part of that love that loves so much that it only says yes, right? So when we're going through our lives, we forget it. So the idea of our philosophy is that we remind ourselves, we remember that we are part of this infinite nature of life. We are part of that presence of God. And so spiritual living was the right thing to say, because now you know what we do. We teach people how to live spiritual lives. We teach people how to deepen and develop a personal relationship with the God of your heart. And I say that over and over again, because the God of your heart is what's guiding and supporting you, and it's a little bit different than the God of my heart. Right? I can't tell you what to do and how to do it. And let me tell you, there are moments when I wish I was one of those ministers where I could tell you what to do and how to do it. Right? I don't have that power. And I'm not going to tell you you're doing it wrong. It is up to you to deepen that relationship. It is up to you to understand what it's trying to tell you and what direction in your life it's encouraging you to go. I'm just there to be your cheerleader and to remind you that you're bigger than you think you are, that you're more capable than you think you are, that you've got power and love and presence, even though it may seem like you're all alone, you are not. Because right where you are, God is. So that's what we believe, and that's who we are. Now, how to explain it to your friends? Tell me when you figure it out. So this is the thing. We consider ourselves what we call inclusively Christian. So it means that our teaching is based on the teachings of Jesus. It is. Ernest Holmes is the founder of religious science, and he's the author of the Science of Mind philosophy. And we were just having this conversation this week that he says in his writings, we are a Christian organization. And I always say, it depends on who's defining what a Christian is, right? If you're defining Christian on making sure that you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, we wouldn't pass that test. And this is the thing that could get me in trouble in other places by saying this, because we don't believe you need to be saved. I don't believe I need to be saved, and I don't believe you need to be saved. Salvation is the awakening, is the enlightenment, is the realizing that you're connected to this presence that is God. That's your salvation. That's your enlightenment. That's your awakening. It's all the same thing. So we go direct to the source, and at the same time, we are based in the teachings of Jesus. If you read the Science of Mind, if you read any of Ernest Holmes' writings, it is a Christian philosophy in that, what did Jesus teach? Jesus taught to love your neighbor. Jesus taught forgiveness. Jesus taught that everybody is one. He just didn't hang out with the rich people. He hung out with everybody. He was with those who were cast off from society. He was welcoming and affirming. He was not judging. And so we are based in that. And you just take a look at our flags, you know that we are a welcoming, affirming, accepting philosophy. And this center that's what we're based in. So, in terms of talking to your friends and loved ones about it, I encourage you to be comfortable with your choices and speak from your heart and realize that there are people who aren't comfortable with that. There are people who cannot accept it because they believe that there's one way, and anybody who's not following that one way is in trouble. And they love you so much, they just want you to be safe and saved. And so you can love them enough to let them hold that, but not let it affect you, right? I don't expect that that everyone's really going to get this or understand it, because this philosophy takes a little bit more of a commitment, of an interaction, of a way of being. It takes, we need to step up and take responsibility for our lives, for our choices, for what we've created. We need to take responsibility for our belief system, and we need to be able to hold that truth, right? And so not everybody understands that. So it's with our compassionate, loving heart that we let them know, I love this church. We've got great music. The minister's kind of funny sometimes. And I always feel good when I leave. Well, that's what my hope is, that everybody feels better after this. Right? That's our goal, is to have this be an inspirational shot to the arm for your week. Are we good? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I talked about, do we believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Yes, we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but we also believe that you are too. And we also believe, Ernest Holmes says that, and our belief is that Jesus was probably the most enlightened, one of the most enlightened humans that walked this earth, but he was a human. And he taught us that. He said, these things and greater shall ye do. He was never the one that said, hey, look at me. I rock. Sorry to go on here to see you. He never said that. He said, do it. He said, take up your bed and walk. He said, this you can do and more. He said, this is about what you will do and you will be. And so it was all about showing the way, not being the only way. So that's what we believe about Jesus. So how do we differ from traditional church? That's it. That's it. That's the belief. We are pretty churchy for an alternative church, right? We are kind of churchy for an alternative church. But the other way that we differ is that John plays a lot of Billy Joel, and I love when he sings James Taylor, and we get to make sure that any meaningful, moving kind of music gets to be played on this stage, right? And part of our experience, whatever, is going to connect you to that place within where you know. Right? There's a place within, you got here today some way. There was something that brought you here today, and that inspiration, that motivation was something that wants to connect in a deeper way to something that's meaningful. And so we can do that in all areas and all aspects of our lives. And so the way that we do that here is through throwing out all the rules about what kind of music we play, what kind of readings we do, what kind of stuff we talk about, and however alternative I think I really am, I'm realizing in my middle age that I'm pretty, and I am that minister, and when they put the Reverend title in front of your name, everybody thinks something about you, So my language is a little bit better when I'm in church, and so I'm a little bit more conservative than I think I and do I teach from the Bible? Yes. Every week I teach from the Bible. It may not be explicit. It may be more of a reference, but I always start with the teachings from Jesus and pick out the teaching of the inspiration of how we should be, and then my talk revolves around that. So I do teach from the Bible, but mostly from those red letters, right? The red letter Bible, or the things that Jesus purportedly had said. And so we do teach from the Bible in that way. But it's the Bible and. So the best part about being a minister in religious science is that I get to not only study and teach from the Bible, but we do that with the Kabbalah, and we do that with the Bhagavad Gita, and we do that with the Torah, and we do that with all the sacred texts, because what Ernest Holmes realized when he was putting together this philosophy is that there's truth in all of it. That there's truth for each of us and inspiration for each of us in all of the sacred teachings. And we can't just throw the baby out with bathwater, right? So, all right, so that's that one. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. All right. That one and that one goes with that. That goes with that. Let's see, that's the big one, so let's see. Oh, and bosses again. Sorry. And light. Okay. I can't read this. The top part I don't understand, but someone wrote, how to bring myself into alignment with soul. It says, each morning I ask, how can I, serve. How can I serve, right? Yes? Someone say yes, if that's yours. Yes? How can I serve? Okay, don't. How to bring myself into alignment with soul. So there's a couple of things that we encourage. One is our spiritual study, right, to understand. We operate on different levels. The other is our spiritual practice to connect. That's the feeling. And the third, we suggest a lot of spiritual practices, but the third in the triangle of this would be we encourage service. How can I serve? So we study to understand, we meditate and pray to connect, and we serve to put our life in perspective. right? When you do something for someone else, well, let's just face it, we are pretty self-centered people, right? Like, we're a pretty self-centered culture, that we get focused on, and the messages out there really talk about, most of us have transcended this, but keeping up with the Joneses, how we're looking, what we've got, what success looks like in life, how we're perceived by other people, and we get kind of self-centered about that, And I think one of the great things of the last 30 years has been the shift in psychology and how counseling has become very important. And I agree with that, even though I'm going to say something right now. But just remember that I do agree with that. I think it's really important. But what can happen is that we can get too clouded on our own stuff. We can get too connected to my issues, right? And this is why a deep commitment to your personal growth has to include getting out of your own way. It has to include serving others. Because we can do our own personal work to understand what our limiting ideas and beliefs are that are holding us back. We can do the deep dive and the counseling to realize that the trauma that I experienced in my youth is still alive within me, and it's affecting the way that I am in relationship with others. We can awaken to some of the blind spots that we don't see by talking to people, to a counselor. But what happens is, sometimes we get stuck in our own bubble, and we don't get beyond it, so we don't put ourselves in the perspective of life. Because this is what I know, is that life is there to support your growth and expansion. When we engage in life, when we get into the making choices to follow our intuitions, to be in relationship in new ways, to speak up for those causes that are important to us, for giving our gifts in different new ways, what we do is we expand into life, and life supports us. Okay? I had a Ernest Holmes quote, actually, that reminded me of that this morning. One of my favorite Ernest Holmes quotes is this. He says this: "All nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual, that it may unloose its own energy. We may be sure that God is for us, whatever our conception of God may be. And this thing acts in accordance with definite law in the universe." And so what that's saying is that all of life, all of nature, all the universe wants your good and your freedom, because you are expressing an aspect of it. So each of us is part of that divine life, and as we live a full life, right? And the other Ernest Holmes quote that came across I love when things come across my Facebook just in the perfect time for the sermon, is it says this: Ernest Holmes says that life is not just something to be endured, it is to be lived in joy in a fullness without limits. Life is not something to be endured, it is to be lived in joy in a fullness without limits. That's why we're here. And so what happens is when we get so stuck in our own ideas, then we never get outside of that and put it in perspective. And so we study to understand who we are and how the universe works and how God works. We do that in our classes or in our reading. We do our meditation daily and our prayer work to feel at the core of our being our connection to God. Because if you don't have that feeling, if you don't have that deep experience, it's all an intellectual exercise and it's a waste of time. When you get that connection, when you allow yourself even 5 minutes of peace and breathing, go stick your feet in the grass and watch the sunset. Right? Sit and listen to that woo-woo music and just breathe. And even if your mind's going a million miles a minute, it doesn't matter, it's still benefiting you. Physiologically and mentally and emotionally. And most importantly, you start to realize that you are bigger than you think you are, and you're part of something greater, and that's God is you. So when we do those two things, we connect to our higher being, and when we serve, either in our community, out in the community, doing something in the world, you put yourself in perspective and realizing and starting to see God in action around you. And that helps you connect with your soul. That's my little suggestion for that. Okay. Okay, so these two go together. I need a sip of water first, okay? I'm trying to do it all. 5 more minutes. This is perfect because I've got 2 more sections. Those are all the same and these are the same. Similar. Okay. So the first one says this. Why and how is the science of mind a principle-based faith? Thank you. You're welcome. And this one says there are many laws in our New Thought teachings, like the law of attraction, the law of circulation. You really don't want any to live. The law of cause and effect. And can you tell me how you define the law of good? Okay, so these two are similar in that we are principle-based faith. And it all comes down mostly to that law of cause and effect. So we believe that the divine, God itself, is cause, and everything that happens after that is effect. Okay? So each of us is part of that divine life. We are intimately and completely connected to that mind of God. And so we are part of the cause. And so we can put things into motion in our lives, and we do that by our choices, by our mindset, and by our belief system. So when we believe that we are weak, that we are poor, that life is against us, the universe says yes. It can only say yes. And so what shows up? You can't handle things. That you don't have the abilities, and that it looks like everybody's out to get you. And the only thing that shifts that and changes that is your own belief. So when you start to see, and we do this by baby steps, by the way, because it seems it's kind of hard to go from a complete belief, I am unlovable, to the idea that life loves me so much I get to have and do and be whatever I want, right? That's a pretty long continuum. So we do this in steps. And every time you see something shift, we acknowledge it, we put our attention upon it, and it expands. So the idea is to awaken first to where we are limiting ourselves to this law of cause and effect and what choices we're making. You know, it's such a privilege. My job is such a privilege. And I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been in the movement for 22. And I've had my eye on this forever, basically, feels like. And I've sat with people year after year after year who just can't get beyond the fact that they're lovable. Who really just don't believe that there's anything lovable about them. And these are people who walk through their life, who are successful, who show up, who can do it, who understand, who are in class, but deep down inside, something has happened within that has taught them, and whether it's, my parent left, or my parent died, or a lover left me, or I was abandoned, or whatever that is, like those experiences are so painful that they just kind of get blocked within us, and we can't handle processing the pain of it, and so it kind of lives somewhere in our consciousness. And so every time we start to move in a direction of expansion, every time we start to move in a place of accepting love, of connecting deeply, it's like that hook from the old days on the stage that hooks you back. And it disintegrates, right? Something will happen. Sometimes we self-sabotage without having any understanding of why we do that. So if I had some magic wand, I know I'm going off on a tangent from the question, I'll come back around, I promise. But if I had some magic wand that I could wave, it would be for each of you to realize how loved you are. The infinite universe has created all of life. And each and every one of us, as those individualized, gorgeous, beautiful snowflakes, there was a moment when the infinite mind, who has thought every single thing, thought you. And you were created. That is love. And it needs you to live fully so much because you are expressing an aspect of itself. You are a divine emanation expression. You are bringing forth something unique into this world. And it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter, any of the experience of your life doesn't matter. If you are here, awake and alive, you have something to express, you have something to contribute, you have something to do or to be. And so that is being uniquely you, with your voice and your tendencies and your ways of being. And I'm saying this to each person in this room, but I'm saying this to every single person out in this country, in this world, whether I agree with them or not. I know that God's alive at the center of them, and God needs them to be fully themselves, fully expressing. And that is love. So, coming back to the idea of being principle-based, it is done unto you as you believe. That's the teachings from Jesus, and that's the teaching that the science of mind is based upon. And so we believe that through our thoughts and our beliefs, we create our experiences. When you change your thinking, you change your life. You change your thought processes, you change your perspective, you change your way that you relate to life, your life changes. And so all of those things, the law of circulation, the law of cause and effect is the basic, but the law of good is that when you open to accepting good, when you believe that this life is good, when you believe that God only wants good for you, then and you start to deepen that belief, it shows up. And that's why we believe that we're principle-based teaching, because we know that that's how it works. Now, yeah, so the law of good is the fact that the universe will say yes to you, and when you are willing to accept the goodness of this life, right? When you are willing to see things differently and expand it, then your experience starts to shift and change. And it's and that's why Ernest Holmes called it a demonstration, that you can demonstrate it. And so when you manifest something, when you have a new experience, when something new comes into your life, he calls it a demonstration. Because we can demonstrate in this teaching that when you shift and you awaken, then everything else, your experience shifts. And let me tell you, if you don't believe that this is true, or you haven't experienced that, get into one of my foundations classes. Because let me tell you, every week, everybody comes in with all these exciting new things. Any class that we have, that there are people who are starting to just read the material and do 5 minutes of meditation every day. They'll come back the next week and say, oh my God, can you imagine what's happened to me? And it's really amazing to watch the expansion and the growth that happens in people's lives when we put our attention on it and when we stay focused on it. Now, that's the key, is that we have to commit to the practice. We have to commit to being connected to it. We have to commit that every day I'm going to connect with God. Every day I'm going to remember who I am. Every day I'm going to expand my conscious awareness of this, and I'm going to do my treatment work, my prayer work, and my affirmations to claim the truth for what I'm wanting. And if we do it a little bit, so it's like going to the gym. I could go do a Pilates class once. Do you think I'm going to have abs of steel? One class, right? Yeah, no. I have to go, and I have to go, and I have to go, right? You can't hit the gym once and then enter the Mr. Universe pageant. That's not going to happen. So we have to commit to the practice. You have to commit to daily reminding yourself of the truth of who you are, and then everything will start to open and unfold. So that's these three. I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. All right, so of course this last one is the big one. I bet you could guess what it is. All right, here is how it's been worded this time. All right, if God is all loving, why do terrible, awful things happen to good people? Mass shootings, cancer, etc. Does everything happen for a reason? And if God rules the planet, why do little children starve And it says here, starve in Africa, but little children are starving here. And what is evil in the mind of the divine? Okay, everybody take a collective breath. I just realized that I saw in the kitchen today there's deviled eggs on the buffet. All right. Okay. Thank God for little gifts. Okay, so, all right, so this is the thing. We are the ones that call things good and bad. We are the ones who label things good and evil. And this is hard to wrap our brains around sometimes. Okay, so this is one of the biggest classes. It's week 8 in foundations. And I usually do 3 whole hours on it, so I'm going to do it in 3 minutes. Okay, I'm going to try and do it in 3 minutes. So here we go. All right, so I want to remind us that we are talking on a couple of different levels. We have the philosophical conversation that raises us into that place of trying to understand how something works. And then we have our human nature in our hearts, where our compassion lives and the difficulty that we have in seeing what's happening in other people's experience. You understand the difference of that? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the intellectual aspect first, and then I'm going to talk about compassionate heart, because they lead into each other. So from the intellectual level, truth is stuff happens. See, I said stuff. Stuff happens. People make choices, and there's a cause. The cause is the choice, and the effect is the experience. Okay? So we are the ones who label whether it's good or bad. But there is always an effect to each cause, and it corresponds to it. So there is no getting around that. There is no God up there holding us like puppet strings, telling us how to do stuff, right? And moving us in different directions. God so loved each of us that God gave us free will and free choice. And that's really important. But it's also a double-edged sword, because we are free to choose. And there's that story of the Native American grandfather who was talking to his grandson, and he said, son, there's a battle going on within me, and it's between 2 wolves. And one is the wolf of good, and one is the wolf of evil. And they're constantly battling within me. And the grandson says, well, Grandpa, which one's going to win? And he says, the one that I feed. Right? So I always remember that, because everything's alive within us, and we are always a choice. And so where are we feeding ourselves? Are we feeding ourselves in acceptance and understanding, in compassion and in love, in respect? Or are we feeding ourselves in judgment and fear of something different, fear of the unknown, and fear of what we don't understand? And so we're feeding our consciousness, whatever it is. Here, 24/7 news channels on all the time, anybody? You got them on, turn them off. I will admit that I was a little attached to my radio and my iPad this week, listening to what was going on out there in the government. I turned it off. I have to turn it off, right? We have to watch what we're feeding ourselves with. We have to watch what we're feeding our consciousness with. And realizing that everything that we experience, everything we read, every conversation we have, every experience is supporting us in either rising up to an understanding, a clearer picture of what's possible, or it's digging us deeper into a hole of what has been, or limitation, or fear. And so the challenge of good and evil is this: we are a choice, and we are free to make those choices. And so from the intellectual perspective, we're talking about an infinite being. You are an infinite being, having this tiny little sliver of an experience of this life in this infinite timeline. But because we are humans, we like this life. I like being in that sliver. I want to stay here as long as I can. I'm having some fun, right? I don't want to go on. I do have great faith that there is something after this life. But I'm not ready to go. And so I like it, right? So we label things bad when they have to do with death. But death is a transition, moving into another realm. So again, from the spiritual perspective, life happens, and it continues, and it evolves, and it reveals itself in all of it. from a human perspective, it's really hard to watch kids suffer. It's really hard to watch the violence that happens between people. It's very difficult. I think that we are in one of the most trying times of my lifetime right now. You know, yeah, I came in at the end of Vietnam and I've been here through that. So that's my lifetime. I feel like we are in one of the most difficult, challenging times in my history. I won't claim it for everybody else. I know that people who've been alive longer have dealt with other challenging moments. But I think that we're at choice now. And in this trying time, we have to ask ourselves, who do we want to be in the difficult moments? Who do we want to be and how do we want to be? And I have this, if you've been here for any period of time, you know that a couple years ago I was pretty obsessed with Hamilton and that play, and I saw it a couple times, love it, and was listening to it 24/7. But that line from Hamilton that says, history has its eyes on you, that is running through my head right now because I want history, even in my little life, doing my little work in my little circle of life here, I want to be on the right side of history in this. And for me, that means acceptance and respect and honoring and love and kindness. For me, personally, that's what it is. So when something comes up that is hard to see out in the world, and it bothers you, that's the time to do something about it. That's the time to give your time, your talent, and your gifts to it. And so, if there's a cause that hurts you to see out there, you are the one who's got to find a way to do something about it. Give some money to a cause, make phone calls, volunteer at an organization, help somebody who's suffering out, be a listening ear or a welcoming heart. We need to be motivated by these things and not just say, I wish God would come and fix it, because we are God. We are the hands and the hearts and the lives of God walking around, and nothing's going to get fixed unless we're the ones who clean it up. So how does God let this happen? God gave us the biggest gift we could possibly have, which is free choice. That's how God lets this happen. And so it's up to us, as part of that divine life, to do something about it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's two aspects to it. There's the understanding that we are infinite beings, and we are the ones that call something good or bad. But at the same time, we are the ones who have to be called to action. And so that's why we're doing the Super Bowl, right? That's why we're doing the Super Bowl. That's why one of the things that I do every year, speaking of the Super Bowl, one of the things that we do every year is we tithe to, around this time of year, we tithe to the women's shelter here in town that supports domestic abuse, because the Super Bowl is the biggest day of domestic abuse in the year. It is. It is. It is. And so I try to be conscious and aware of these things that we can support. The other thing that's up and happening right now, I don't know if you know this or not, and I'll try and bring it around and bring it up here in a second here, but you know, so I know it's like, I'm going a little lower on the energy here. So the suicide rates are up like tremendously, and they're at an all-time high at this moment. And so one of the intentions that I have for the spiritual community is that we are a place of connection and honoring. And so I want to remind you that we are here for you. We have this amazing team of practitioners and ministers here who are available, are listening ears and support for you. We've got a new booklet that's coming out next week that talks about, that highlights all of our practitioners and their histories and their study and what they've done and what they have to offer. And they're always available at the back corner of the room for prayer. And my thing is that, belonging and connection are so core and they're so necessary. And so we're so glad that you're here. And if you are struggling with something, please reach out. Please reach out. Our beloved ones they're the ones who are wearing the white stoles. They've done years of training to be of support to you. And that's our goal, is to be, as a center for spiritual living, we want to be a place where you come and celebrate those high, joyful moments. This is a place of celebration, and let me tell you, we know how to party. We're going to have some great parties this year. We know how to enjoy the joy of life completely, but I also want this to be the place that you come when you're hurting. I've had people come to me who I haven't seen in a while, and they say, oh, I didn't come to church, I was struggling with something. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the time to come to church. And she's like, well, you people are so happy. I didn't think I could be there, you know? Well, let me tell you, that's the exact time for you to be here. To sit in the space, to sit in the love, and to ask for a prayer after service. The idea here is for you to live a full, fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful life, and we are going to do everything possible to help you get there. And that's my question.